and welcome back to Luke Deckard Show. I'm your host, Luke Deckard. Tonight, really excited. I'm really excited for tonight's show. I did one a while back, sort of touching on AI and the writer's strike, but didn't really dive in too deep with the complications of what it means to be using artificial intelligence within the creative industry. So I'm excited to be able to do that tonight, and I have a really special guest. So I've freelance writer and indie author Liz Shipton. She's written several YA novels, including Savage, Scourge Seeds, Soul, Sand, and Salt. All of the links to her books are in the description of this video, so you can go and check out her books there. So without further ado, let's bring Liz on and begin the chat. Hello, Liz.
Hey.
How's it going? Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Welcome. Thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. So before we kick off with diving into AI stuff, I think it'd be fun to let everyone know a little bit about who you are as a writer and whatnot. So I'm curious to know first what was your writer's journey? What started you out on this path to becoming a writer and an author?
Well, I think like many people. Oh my goodness! Sorry, it just started thundering here.
That's awesome.
Did you hear that? Wow,
Yeah,
that was really loud.
I did. That was awesome. Yeah.
My dog is also now going to go crazy. I'm so sorry. This literally just started happening. I think like many people, I kind of was always under the impression that like maybe I could write a book one day, or like maybe I could write. And it was kind of always in the back of my mind, something that I maybe wanted to do at some point.
Yeah.
I've always been a creative person. So for most of my life, I was a musician. I was in theater as a kid. I did a lot of musical theater. I wrote songs. I had my own band. I, composed music and all that kind of stuff. And then about 2 years ago, my boyfriend and I moved onto a sailboat, and we started sailing that boat, allegedly around the world. We'll see how far we actually get. But that basically gave me the time, really, to actually start pursuing writing in a real way.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of what kicked off. And also my books, are heavily influenced by my own life and by my sailing adventures. So it was also a way for me to kind of like process the journey and what we're doing and everything that's happening. And it's been really fun to kind of like work things from the traveling into my writing.
Yes. Yeah. That's quite fun. So your books, they seem to be sort of dystopian-y. What's been the appeal and the draw to focus on that particular genre? I'm always interested why people choose a genre.
That's a great question. So I think initially, honestly, it was just because some of my favorite books when I was like a teenager were, like The Hunger Games and Divergent and things like that.
Yeah.
But as I have written the books, I've realized that like, this whole sort of dystopian world that I have created is very much based on my real feelings about our world and like what's happening in it. So climate change features heavily in my books, as does like biotech and the role and the domination of tech companies and corporations in our world.
Yes.
She's going to keep doing that. I'm so
it's
sorry.
Okay. Doggo guest star. It's absolutely fine.
So yeah, it started out as just like me thinking, well, I'll just write the thing that I enjoyed reading. And then, as I continued to write it, sort of realizing that actually this is a great medium for me to get on a soapbox and say all the things I want to say about the world,
Yeah. And because you've gone the indie route.
Yes.
So I'm also curious as to why an author picks one route over another. And I know that self-publishing has changed quite a lot over the last 10 years. It's become much more accessible, better and easier, I think, than what it was a few years ago. You have a lot more quality individuals publishing quality books through that route rather than going traditional. So I'm wondering, what did you ever want to go the traditional route, or was the indie one the only one for you?
Yeah, well, so when I first started out, I think I always imagined I would go indie, but also
Yeah.
I did pursue traditional publishing. When I first wrote my book, I queried it
Yeah.
for about, I didn't query it for very long. I think I spent maybe like 3 to 6 months querying and
Long enough.
got rejected by basically everyone,
Yep.
and was like, all right, well, I gave that a shot. I'm just going to do what I was going to do in the first place and go
Yeah.
the indie route. And like, honestly, I do love the indie route. I think I'll probably pursue traditional publishing maybe again at some point. But
Yeah.
for now, I really enjoy being able to be like so hands-on with every part of the process.
Yeah.
I'm a former software engineer, so like I coded my own website, and like
Oh,
I
wow.
really enjoy learning about all the marketing and like analysis that has to go into sort of figuring out where your audience is and what they want and that kind of stuff. Like so yeah, all of it, even being on TikTok
Yeah.
is fun for me. And I actually am really enjoying, being able to be in control of like every part of the process.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. I like that. Nice. So I think, yeah, before we dive into the AI stuff, for anyone listening, it'd be really helpful if you like and subscribe to the channel. Go follow Liz on all of her channels as well. Again, there's links in the description of the chat where you can find her online. So let's dive into the AI stuff. I've with this whole sort of rise, it seems like it's been a very sharp rise with AI. It's in the way that it's being talked about now with ChatGPT and Bard and all that sort of stuff. If you think about, back in January, AI was on nobody's mind, right? It wasn't in the zeitgeist. No one really were thinking about it in across the board. It felt like, to me at least. And then suddenly within this last summer, it's just become a quite serious threat, I think, to the creative industry. Which you have the WGA in the states striking, and one of the big things they're striking on is the use of AI writing with when it comes to scripts and for films and TV shows and things like that. I know the Society of Authors here in the UK are really, investigating AI and trying to work with the government in terms of, what sort of rules need to be put in place to, kind of contain it so that it's not just going crazy. But then you also have a bunch of people who are already using it to publish books and put fully AI written books on Amazon and brag that, oh, I've written a book in a day and published it in a day. It's like, well, that's not really a sign of quality. That's just silly. So the first question that I have is, I'm curious as to what you think about the role AI has to play within the creative industry. What is that role? Does it have one? And if it does, what do you think that role should be?
Man, that's such a big question. I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, in my mind, you can't really fight it. Like, you're not gonna technological change happens whether we want it to or not. There is no way you're gonna fight it. So, and I do think that, like, in the right capacity and in the right hands, AI could be a very useful tool. I've actually been playing around with some of the, ChatGPT and some of the art generation AI tools, and have found them to be, interestingly, once you start playing around with them, you kind of see what the limitations of them are. And it makes it a little bit less scary, I think. I do think that you kind of have to maybe not necessarily embrace it, but figure out a way to incorporate it into your work. I think that, like, for example, I've used ChatGPT really just as an experiment. I used it to help me generate some blurbs for my books.
Sure.
And so what I did was, like, I took a blurb that I had already written, which I thought was perfectly good, and I fed it into ChatGPT, and I said, here's a blurb. Can you make this better?
Right.
And ChatGPT spat something out that was, like, actually surprisingly coherent and good, and and had some good stuff in it. And then I did that maybe 4 or 5 times, and I sort of took what I liked about it and I worked it into my original blurb, and then I put it up on Amazon, mainly just to kind of see like will this have an impact on sales? Is this better than what I could do by myself?
Yeah.
The jury's out on whether it actually is or not.
Yeah.
It's pretty early still for me to know.
Yeah.
But like, it was interesting. It was very much like having a writing partner or something, or like not just having a blank slate where you look at the page and you go, like, okay, what am I going to put here?
Yeah.
To have something to work with and edit down, it did make that process like a little bit easier for sure.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely a potential use of AI, and like other people have said this as well. I was watching like Adam Cordova on Offline, and he talks about like potentially using, like a large language model to generate like a first draft, and then going back in and editing that first draft. I don't know if I would ever do that, although I do hate writing the first draft. Like, it's so hard. I much prefer editing a first draft than I like writing the first draft. So, if I can have something that makes that process easier, I don't know. Do I want something to make the process easier, or is the pain of the process part of the joy of writing?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. That's complicated because I actually agree with the use of AI as a tool, as a tool in the writer's arsenal. I don't agree with it being used to replace writing. I really don't even agree with it being used as the, the writer doesn't have an idea, so they're like, just give me ideas.
Sure.
I'm even sort of like a little bit iffy on that. Now I do think, like, in terms of using it as a tool, I think, if one has an idea for a story, or if you are, let's say you're not really knowledgeable on, I don't know, purchasing a house, and you want to write a story about how someone is swindling people through purchasing of a house, and you sort of maybe plug that in, those some of those ideas into, say, like, how could you swindle? Obviously with AI you have to be a little bit beat around the bush, and you have to say, like, imagine you're writing a story about da 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 da. How would someone swindle? Blah 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 blah. I think those sort of things to sort of, it's like the writing, the writing prompts that you do, and it's just, you just sort of just write ideas, you just write things down on the page to kind of, free flow and see what comes out. I really don't have a problem with that being used, AI being used for that kind of stuff, and if it does, and when it does eventually improve, I also don't mind it being used as a form of a research tool either. Because in some ways there are aspects that aren't going to be that different to, a Google search. It's fine. It's not, honestly, the dog isn't very loud. It's not that loud.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's absolutely fine. But so I think it's definitely an interesting tool, and I think, for certain things, like maybe writing a blurb, are interesting ways of speeding up certain processes. I mean, what's the one thing that all writers hate? And it's writing that blurb. It's you have to condense all of your book down into this short little paragraph, and it is a pain. And having a tool that can help you do that, you've already put the work in to write something. You use that tool to help condense that. I don't have a problem with that. I think where I do have problems is where it's, someone is just wanting to wholesale write their book, write their script entirely with AI, and just using AI to do the work and then edit it. And I think part of that reason is because, like, AI doesn't have any originality. It's only imitating other people's work and styles. So
So technically, I mean, I think that's actually really interesting what you said about using it as a research tool. That's not something that had ever occurred to me, but that is a really interesting use case. Like, if I don't know anything about whatever I'm trying to write about, like in the book I most recently wrote, I had to learn about fencing a little bit because one of the characters fences. So I'm over like watching YouTube videos on fencing, but like maybe I could just ask ChatGPT, like, what the rules of fencing are. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dang it. What I was about to comment on just like completely went out of my head. Oh, it's the copyright thing, right? So like you said, you know, generative AI is not actually generative. It's just based on inputs. And like the Society of Authors piece that you sent me, there's a lot of like copyright infringement of like authors' works who have been used to train this AI. So then by using the AI to create your work, is that technically copyright infringement? Like, yeah. It's a weird,
especially particularly when you're putting into ChatGPT or others, write a story in the vein of or similar to, you know, Raymond Chandler. Once you've plugged that in, or write me a short mystery, you know, about, you know, a Star Trek character or whatever the hell, you know, that is then going to pull all the stuff it knows from that particular genre, and that will then makes it complicated, because I was like, that, you know, you haven't really done anything new there. It was interesting, because I did watch the Pod Save America with Adam Cordova. What's his name? Adam. I said it wrong, didn't I?
I think that's it.
Conover. There we go. And he made a really interesting parallel, and he compared AI to the atomic bomb, and Oppenheimer, and he said that the problem wasn't splitting the atom, it was making the bomb. And
I wrote that quote down in my notes also, because
that was a good one. I was like, that's a really good, you know, analogy, I think, because I think, are we in that position where we've created something, and there's obviously, I've got the Terminator up behind me, because, you know, that's the perfect cinematic fear of what AI is going to do at some point.
The other thing, like, I mean, and I think Adam kind of touched on this as well a little bit in that interview, was like this term AI that we're all sort of like bandying around and we're all so afraid of. It kind of feels like a term that has been created by the tech companies to misdirect our fear from the people who are actually responsible onto the technology. Like the technology itself is not the problem. It's
correct.
It's the people behind it who could potentially use it for nefarious reasons that are the problem. And so this whole discussion of AI, it kind of feels a little bit like a sleight of hand by these companies to sort of make us point the finger at AI as opposed to pointing the finger at those guys.
Yes. It's definitely much easier to you know, if you think about like the Wizard of Oz, it's much easier to be afraid of the big, you know, face that's floating there versus the guy behind the curtain. And it's the guy behind the curtain that you definitely need to be pointing the finger at. I absolutely agree. So I guess my kind of building on from that. So do you think AI is going to help writers write better?
I mean, in the way that like it could correct your grammar and stuff. Totally. Sure. Yes. Do I think it's going to help writers write better? I don't know. I mean, this kind of raises an interesting question in my mind of like, what is better these days? Like there doesn't seem to be any metric for like what's good anymore. And like,
nope.
I mean, like at that offline piece, and then this like Madeline Ashby piece that I also read sort of touch on this, where like everything is so fragmented, right? In media, in politics, and everything, that like literally everyone can get their own version of good, their own version of better.
Yes.
And it's like, it's not necessarily better. It's all just different.
Yes.
And like, you know, on the one hand, that's great because there's no gatekeeping anymore. Sure. On the other hand, is some gatekeeping like a good thing to have some sort of metric for what is good? I don't know. I'm not I'm not going to say one way or the other, like if it is or not. I don't know if AI could help people write better, but it could help people write more, which is what seems to be the substitute for better these days.
Yes.
I guess.
Or do you think it will enable people who are maybe
Sure. Yeah.
creatively illiterate,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, enter
I know.
the chat.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. I was thinking about this a little bit, where I was kind of thinking like, okay, I feel like there has to be some sort of like, what do we do about this? Some
Yeah.
discussion about like, what do we do?
Yeah.
I started thinking like, if AI, so for example, my ebooks are in Amazon Kindle Unlimited, and
Yes.
Amazon Kindle Unlimited is dominated by a lot of romance books.
Oh
And
boy, yes.
I think many nowadays of those romance books are starting to be at least partially generated by AI.
Probably.
And I have a feeling that some of those, and I'm trying to like tread carefully, because I'm not trying to like cast any kind of disparagement or whatever on authors, but like,
Yeah.
it's possible that some of those AI generated books are going to be lower quality.
Yeah.
But then again, like, if that's the case, maybe I just remove myself from this like race to the bottom. Maybe I stop trying to compete with AI,
Yeah.
and I let AI generate all that bottom of the barrel stuff.
Yeah.
That just, there's lots of it, and people will eat it up because it's cheap and easy.
Yeah.
Maybe I just remove myself from that and I go and do something else entirely. You know?
It's fascinating, because I do sometimes, when I try and step back and not be so worried about it, because like, when I think about things like this summer, like most of the films I saw in the cinema have been garbage. Like
Right.
the Flash
That's
was awful. Indiana Jones, I love Indiana Jones, but the new one was fucking awful. It just was, and there's a lot of shows that we tried watching this year that have just been awful. And you do have this. There is a rhetoric out there that is that, oh well, AI will help weed out the bad writing and da 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 da. I don't really necessarily believe that, but then I do think back to like the 90s and the early 2000s, where you had, if you ever watch the YouTube channel Red Letter Media, or Mystery Science Theater, where they make fun of old B movies. Well, they're bad B movies for a reason. They weren't good. They were bottom of the barrel stuff. And you could say that, well, this particular film is trying to copy off of Gremlins, and it's cheap, and it's a cliched imitation, right? But that sort of stuff never really stopped good films being made, and it didn't stop good stuff rising to the top. And even if I said about this summer, there's all this bad stuff, but then you have Barbie and Oppenheimer, which have risen to the top after several years of comic book overload and things like that, where it's like, oh, here's a couple of things that look good, have some originality to them, and they're making bank. So I do sort of think that, even though you can, like, if you use the romance as an example, like, yeah, you go on Amazon and you look through romance, it's a flooded market. With really crap writers. I'm just going to be honest about it. Like, I went to a self-publishing conference back in 2022 maybe, and they had a couple of indie self-published romance authors there who were bragging about how they don't use editors, they just do it themselves, and they just kind of write and just go with whatever comes to them. And I looked at their books. I looked at it, and it was overwritten, it was clunky. And I was like, this is bottom of the barrel garbage being read by illiterate people. Like, it's just like, it's literally the guilty pleasure stuff. It's frothy there's no substance to it. It's just that people get kicks out of, I guess, I think their romance was some sort of like mean romance, where like the relationships were like very,
there
very
is
nasty.
a lot of dark romance, and I mean, romance is a whole beast. I like to be careful about, like, I don't like to cast judgment on like what people read, because people should be able to read whatever they want, and there should be people to write for those readers who want to read that, right?
Sure.
Like I'm probably not going to write it, but like somebody should, if people want to read it. And if that somebody is AI writing that, that's fine with me, and I'll find a different audience. Hopefully, maybe. Because
because I don't know if I was on I was on YouTube watching a video, and there was a trailer for the BBC Mastro class that they do, which is the BBC's version of basically doing, you know, like the masterclass stuff where you can learn from. Yeah, they have their own version of that, and they had one with Lee Child, and this is where I go and piss off all the crime writing community that I'm a part of. But his one of his like hooking blurbs or sentences was that if you're a reader, you're secretly a writer, and I just thought that's bullshit. That's bullshit, Lee. Like, come on, you know that's not true. Maybe you really believe that, but that's not true. And all that really does, in my opinion, is it enables people who aren't actually creative, who don't want to take the time to understand the craft and understand what good storytelling is all about and how you do that, and then do that. For me, I saw that, okay, some idiot is going to listen to that and be like, oh yeah, and I could just use ChatGPT to write myself a good crime book, and I could be just like Lee Child because I'm a reader. And it's like, well, no, there's more to it. There's so much more to it than just reading a book, I think. And I think that's, while there is, I agree that, there, if people want to use the AI stuff to write their fiction for that particular audience, that's fine. But I'm still also I'm torn on it, because I'm also like, I also feel like there needs to be, in some ways, like some sort of quality control somehow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what that is, and I don't. Right. I mean, I'm sort of like a pessimist, I think, at heart, where I just like, yeah, that would be great. I don't see it happening, but like we can sit here and talk about it, but I highly doubt that it's ever going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
You think? I mean, there is, I guess, nowadays an audience for everything, and so you just have to kind of have faith that like you're gonna find an audience that resonates with your work and that doesn't want and that feels the same, right? Like, this is I kind of like, I subscribe to the 1,000 true fans model, and I subscribe to that model in the way that, like, I think there's 8 billion people on the planet currently, and there are more coming every day. There's got to be at least 1,000 people out there that are like me, that share my values and that want to read similar things to what I want to read and to what I want to write. Yeah. So if I can find those people, great.
Yeah. I agree. Just a couple. Chief Brody Rules in the chat has been ticking off things that I've mentioned, like Star Trek, The Flash, and Indiana Jones. I'm assuming he has a bingo card, because there tends to be certain things that I end up mentioning almost every show, which is probably like mostly it's Star Trek, and he'll get another one because the other one is Smallville. I somehow bring in Smallville somehow, even if it's just to say Smallville, just to make him happy.
I've actually never seen Smallville. I feel like it's one of those ones that I missed it, and I've never caught it.
Genuinely love it. It's we can have a small Smallville chat right now, but no, it hit at the perfect time for me, because I was junior high? I was like a year out of high school, I think. So I was maybe 8th grade when the first season premiered. And so I sort of felt like, in terms of like age and relationship to Clark Kent, like I was like, yeah, I was like the perfect age to follow that journey. I guess it's like kids who were reading Harry Potter who were like 7 or whatever. How was he 11 when he starts?
Yeah, that was me all over. Yeah. Yeah.
So it was kind of like, that was my Harry Potter, and I followed that right to the end. And it had its ups and downs, but it was in my opinion, it's a very good show. It's a very good show. I can recommend it if it's on Amazon Prime. So, well, at least it is here. Amazon Prime changes depending on where you are in the world. So,
right.
At least it is here. So I guess, back to AI. What do you think the risks are with AI to the creative industry? Now, we've talked upon some of this a little bit, but I want to sort of extrapolate this idea a little bit more. What do you think the other risks AI poses to the industry?
Well, so I mean, obviously, there's the lack of compensation of the work that is being used to train the AIs. Yeah. I don't know if that's a risk necessarily, but it is definitely something that feels like it should be addressed.
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, there's also the risk of just there being no writers, like human writers on TV shows anymore,
Yes.
which is what it sort
Yeah.
of seems like the writer's strike is like heading towards. But
Yeah.
and sort of maybe that whole industry just kind of going away, and a
Yeah.
lot of people's livelihoods and jobs just sort of that not existing anymore.
Yeah.
And then this piece I read by Madeline Ashby, she talked about this concept of like fragmentation and how everything is so sort of curated and customized and tailored to each specific individual. She talks about AI having, and it's kind of a really interesting, she's a speculative fiction writer, so she took it to the extreme of like, imagine a world where you create your own TV show using characters from an AI stable, using a script that was generated by AI, using effects that were generated by AI. And you literally, on your TV at home, you just put this all together and you create it for yourself, and then you watch it, and maybe you get it for 48 hours and then it disappears, or something like that.
Yeah.
Which is a really interesting and sort of dystopian like thing to think about. But then you also, I mean, I read this article and I thought, wow, that does sound really terrible, because she talks about like, okay, in that case, who is being paid? Who is the creator? Who is the audience? Who is, being compensated in any way for this? And at the end of the day, are you ultimately just putting up a picture on your fridge and saying, look, Dad, look what I made?
Yeah.
But then, and I thought about that, and I thought about it a little bit more today. And I kind of thought like, I don't know, would that be so bad? Because I think back to like when I was a teenager, I used to make these weird little like claymation movies and like reenactments of like Lord of the Rings and stuff with my friends. We just had a video camera and we would film stuff. And it was just for us, right? Like we would spend, hours and hours making these incredibly detailed claymations, moving, one bit at a time. But like nobody in the world is going to see this except for us.
Yeah.
But we loved it, and it was fun for us to do, and it was fun for us to watch together afterwards. And I kind of thought, like, in that world that Madeline Ashby is talking about, is that the model where, like, maybe rather than media and entertainment being this, like, global organization where everyone in the world sees the next Marvel movie, maybe it's a case of, like, okay, well, I know that Luke is really good at making these, like, AI-generated movies. Let's all go to his house and watch the new thing that he made.
Right.
And you get to just share it with your friends. And maybe it's like a very localized, just the people in your town, or just the people in your group, or your group of friends, or whatever, get to kind of create these things together and experience them together.
Yeah.
That's like maybe sort of a more positive take on like where all of this like type of thing could be heading.
Yeah. I think it does also sort of remind me, I'm going to bring it back to Star Trek. But if you've ever seen like Next Generation or Deep Space Nine, they have the holodecks.
Right.
And the holodecks are basically that, where it's you go into the holodeck and you have your program, and your program puts you inside the story, and you can make it however you want. Captain Picard had his he liked to be a private eye, and had like his little 1930s serial sort of stuff that he was doing.
Right.
And so there's things like that I'm like, I don't have any problem with even AI maybe being used as, and this sort of falls more into a gaming thing more than a storytelling thing. So and I don't, this would be a conversation for gamers or people who work in gaming. How would that work? How does that affect you? That idea doesn't seem scary to me. Sounds kind of interesting and fun. But is that something that they would be opposed of, or is there a way of, I guess if they're building the models and things like that, then that is doesn't take anything away from their revenue streams, I suppose. But yeah, so I could see that kind of being fun.
It's like a world where you kind of have to think like, all right, if AI is going to be this incredibly disruptive thing that is going to potentially destroy streaming or movies or TV or whatever, maybe it's time for writers and actors and performers to innovate something else. Maybe there's like something that doesn't exist yet. Maybe there's something that like completely brand new, some creative media or type of thing. Or maybe it's a this is kind of funny. I think I'm like pretty biased because I'm a theater kid.
Yeah.
But I'm like, why don't we let's like build theaters? Why don't we go back to
Yeah.
live theater? Why
Yeah.
don't we have writers writing plays? Why don't we go see Broadway shows? Why
Yes.
don't we go see live music and live comedy and like things where actual humans are standing in front of you doing things together? And
Yes.
then, of course, it'll only be 20 years before they've invented cyborgs, and the cyborgs are replacing us there as well. But like, we'll have that 20 years at least.
Yes, it's true, and I guess that's the other thing. I mean, you know, theater versus theater here in the UK versus the States is very, very different. There's a much stronger theater culture across the country here than there is across the country in the States. I think I was maybe 16, 17 before I saw my first play, and it was at like a dinner theater, and it was really cheap, and it was, what was it, Joseph and the Technicolor coat, whatever that called, you know, and it was, you know, in Indiana. It wasn't, you know, it wasn't good. It was, you know, it was really, really lame. You know, but you know, if you're in bigger cities, you have access to much better quality stuff, or, you know, again, places like London. And yeah, I mean, maybe that is the thing. Maybe there's an innovation out there somewhere that hasn't caught on yet, or will, you know, that will allow creatives to do their job. And I think that's the thing that AI is threatening at the moment. Is it's threatening the creative's ability to do their art for a living.
Right.
But
I mean, like, creatives have always faced this problem of not being compensated for their work, right? Like, I mean, before I was a writer, I was a musician, and I mean, I've been this is like the same argument, the same problem that I've been facing since I was like 15 years old, which is just that like people just don't want to pay artists for what they do. And it's sometimes honestly, I think then like, is what I do valuable? Because it doesn't seem like it, because it, you know, people, I feel like artists love to talk about how valuable their work is to society, but like, if you have to keep saying it over and over and over again, is it? I don't know. Like,
yeah, I mean, I would say it definitely is, and that whole argument where people say, you know, it's not valuable or things like that, or don't want to pay, stems totally from ignorance. Because if you think about what was the thing that got most people through the pandemic, you know, it was everyone turned to the arts, everyone turned to TV shows, to podcasts, to YouTube shows, things, you know, what was his face, David Tennant and Michael Sheen had a hit show right off the bat about both of them, you know, being in lockdown. I can't remember what it was called, but it was a really funny show that ran for a few seasons, and it was really fun. And you know, and you see all this stuff where, you know, people turn to the arts anytime things are bad, and then when things are good, people are sort of, well, fuck you. You know, and then that's the cycle that kind of constantly repeats itself. Right now, well, I can tell you, in the States, in about 2 weeks, when no new shows are coming out, and when films are being delayed because the studios have nothing to release, and so they're trying to delay and put them into next year, people are going to be like, well, this really sucks. And then you start to feel, then you do begin to feel, okay, this is the value of art. You know, this is, oh, you know, I get to see my favorite TV show. I mean, I really loved the new season of the new show 1923 with Harrison Ford and Helen Mirren. That was an incredible show. That show was now delayed. See, it's only meant to have 2 seasons. That season 2 was meant to start filming, but now it can't because of the strikes. And that's because of these studios being jackasses. You know, and so it's you know, as someone who loves and values art, I'm like, well, okay, now the art that I love is now being delayed because of just horrendous greed and selfishness from these megacorps who, you know, rake in so much money. But sorry, sort of kind of bring it back to the topic of you know, what are the risks? That is one risk, is you know, artists aren't being, you know, paid for their work. But I also worry quite a lot about the lack of transparency.
Sure.
You know, and because I'm sort of thinking like, you know, it would be really easy. I know the AV Club, online magazine, not newspaper, but entertainment outlet, recently did a review, and it was a totally AI generated review. And it's like, well, where does art criticism come into this when the art is artificial and the review is artificial? Where
Mhm.
are people going to find their authenticity? And I think people look to art for authenticity, not for some sort of artificial shell.
Mhm.
So I don't know what you think about that, but that to me is something that actually worries me about this the way AI could be used, not fear of AI, but the way it could be used by certain people to just not be transparent about what's behind the creation.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
you think that's a problem, or what, am I exaggerating? What do you think?
No, I mean, I do think it's a problem, definitely. It's it's a hard one to know what to do about, because it's already, there's no transparency, right? We don't know
Yeah.
what these models have been trained on.
Yeah.
We don't know who's, I guess you just want to assume at this point that it's just like everything. Any text that's on the internet is probably part of an AI.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
all art and video and audio and everything is just kind of being consumed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I guess this is like this like sleight of hand thing
Yeah.
that I was talking about, where it's like, oh, be afraid of that thing over there. Meanwhile,
Yeah.
I'm over here building more of them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And how long do you think it will be? Because I was sitting, over at our neighbor's house, on Saturday morning, or maybe it was Sunday morning, I can't remember. And we were chatting about AI, and I mentioned to him, I was like, look, it's how long is it going to be before the new Ernest Hemingway book is published, the new F. Scott Fitzgerald book is published,
Mm-hmm.
because the publisher has fed all of their works into the AI, and therefore that work that is generated is being generated solely based off of their storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
how
mean,
long will
here's the
that
thing,
be?
though. It's like, as soon as you say that, I'm like, oh, I would read that. Like, I kind of want to see what that would be like. I mean, and that's like ultimately the problem, right? Is like, humans are very much just like, ooh,
Yeah.
yeah, what would that be like? Let's find out. There's
Yes.
and like, having worked in tech, like, I was a coder for a while, and having worked in the tech industry, there doesn't ever seem to be any point that people in that world go, that's good. That's
Yeah.
enough. I think we'll stop. Like, I think
Yeah.
we have it there. It's always no, like, what's the next iteration? What's the next thing we build? What's the next feature? What's the next product? Like, we have
Yeah.
to continually keep going and keep iterating and keep improving and keep building.
Yeah.
And that's just what humans do. Like, we just don't stop.
Yeah.
So I don't know. How long will it be until the next Scott Fitzgerald book? I might go do that right now. Sounds fun.
Yep. Chief Brody Rules in the chat says, I'd read that. Luke with his great ideas. I mean, that's the thing. I know one publisher who did this was many years ago, way before AI was even a concept in this capacity. A publisher who released a new Sherlock Holmes book that was written by Arthur Conan Doyle, and that's essentially what the author had done. And the author had only used words that were within the Sherlock Holmes canon. So within the I think he wrote like 60 stories in total, like a bunch of short stories and a few novels. The only words the author would use, were ones that were within the canon. And so because these were words that were written down by Doyle, the excuse was that this is a new Doyle book, kind of sorta.
Right.
But really it's not. Really it's just someone. It's the way I see it is sort of like a Frankenstein's monster. It's I'm gonna just slap on this arm, I'm gonna slap on this leg, I'm gonna use this brain, and try and pass it off as the next evolution in humanity. The next great thing. It's like, well, it's not. You've actually created a monster. And it's because kind of leading on from that, there was the article by Simon Rich, who's a screenwriter and author. He wrote one for time.com, and the title of it was what AI writing saying what AI writing is really capable of,
Mm.
and that was a really fascinating story, because he was kind of looking at why he was actually scared of AI at the moment, because he was looking at AI writing that isn't available to the public yet.
Right. I think, was this the one about the jokes?
It was the one about the jokes. Yeah. So
Yeah.
he has a friend who works in tech, and he was like, the stuff out in the public is clunky and terrible, but here's some stuff that's not available to the public yet. And
Yeah.
there were short stories in this article. There were hypothetical onion headlines, and the gag in the article was that he was like, I'm going to give you 5 onion headlines. You need to pick which one was AI. At the end of it, he was like, they're all AI, and all of them. I was like, damn, those are all really plausible onion articles.
Yeah, I read the jokes and I was actually like, oh, these are actually kind of funny.
Yeah.
Which is that was scary to me, because the thought that like an AI could be funny is like one of the most unsettling things I think I've ever thought about.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of where it's like, damn, like, you can see why greedy studio heads are thinking, I don't need you human flesh bags when I can just use this and not pay you anything.
Right.
Like, I don't need you anymore. So
and
then
so,
it's like, no,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
I was going to say, I mean, so yeah, in that case, then maybe we just say like, fuck streaming, fuck studios, fuck those guys. And we all go into the woods and we start traveling Shakespeare companies or something. Like, I
like it. I like it.
I don't know. I'm thinking like, if we're talking about a world where it is so severely disrupted, we need to be thinking disruptively as well. Like,
yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, to remind again, this sort of one thing in the chat from Jeffrey Shipton, I'm assuming is a relative. I'm assuming.
That's my
Oh,
dad.
hello, Jeffrey. He says, in the old days, folks used to turn to religion. Art is better. Art is better when it's made by people. So yes. I was going to say something, and now I can't remember what I was going to say. Oh yeah. I guess the question is like, what is the, when it comes to art, what is the human value to art? Because I know what I was going to say. We're going to carry on with that, but I was all back on what you were saying about being disruptive. I mean, that's very much what, if you think about punk rock music or 90s like indie movies and things like that. That was all about being disruptive. Quentin Tarantino style movies were totally different to what was happening with mainstream movies, and then Pulp Fiction and things like that come out, and it's like, holy crap, this is great stuff. So I do think that the hope for art definitely lies in indie, and once like punk rock, once punk rock becomes vogue, then it becomes a corporate thing. But I do think that there will probably be some sort of new indie movement where people are like, oh, this is AI written, nah, this one's actually written by a human, I'm gonna go with that one instead. I sort of hope that's kind of where we might go. But so back to the questions. I mean, what for you? Like, what do you think the human value to of art is?
Do you mean like, what does a human actually bring to art, or like why is art valuable to humans?
What does the human bring to art? So why is the human component to art essential, whereas it's non-essential with AI?
I mean, I guess technically, if you think about it, AI was made by humans. So there is still, you could argue, a human component to AI. Like, we built them. It's a tool that we made that is
more human than human. We're going right into that Blade Runner world.
Right, exactly. Oh man, asking what the human element of art is, that's like asking what is a human, which like, I don't know. Come on. This is why I write. I'm trying to figure it out. What is a soul? Who fucking knows? It's not me. It's chaos, I think. Is the only thing that I can really think of. It's like it's that like it is that unknowable thing, or it's that like moment of inspiration that you don't know where it comes from, or do you know what I mean? Like, there's a book called Sourdough, actually. I think it's by Robin Sloan. I forget. But anyway, it's a girl she's working in tech, and she lives in San Francisco, and she's a baker. And she's trying to teach a robot how to crack an egg. Right. And it turns out, I forget exactly how the end of the book goes, but basically what she has to do in order to get this robot to crack the egg is she basically has to like shut the robot down for that like split second where it actually needs to crack the egg, and just sort of like let Jesus take the wheel and see what happens. And it's like that. It's that moment of the unknowable thing, when everything is shut down, when there's no feedback loop, when there's no input, when there's nothing to base anything on.
Yeah.
That is sort of the like inspirational moment where like true creativity happens, I think.
Yeah. I agree with that. I think the thing that the human component brings is authenticity to situations. And what I mean by that is what AI is going to be able to do is produce really safe stories, safe, inoffensive stories. And I've always been a component of, stories aren't safe. The world isn't safe, so why should a story be safe? And I think that's something that, two people's experience of one thing can be widely different. Three people's experience is going to be insane. So and that kind of what really happened in a situation when you have four people who witness something and they all have four different experiences of that thing that they've witnessed or experienced. I don't think AI will ever be able to fully understand that. And I think that's something that is really probably more unique to the human experience. Which, because, like I said, you can have two people painting a picture of the same sunset. One could be, a style, and the other could be a completely different style. One could be looking like a happy sunset. One could be more like foreboding and ominous, depending on how that comes out. And that's the thing that the human brain, I think, is going to be, it just has there's a bit more nuance to it that I think when it comes to the AI generated stuff that is going to be the person plugging it in. They're wanting to do say they're wanting to do a new movie that's a new like inspirational sports movie. It's all going to be the same beats, the same cliches, things like that. And that's where I think people want, because you don't ever hear maybe it's the AI will be the disposable media. Maybe AI will be the pulp fiction.
That's that is sort of what I envision happening.
Yeah.
And I think like there's always space for that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of space for it these days. But that doesn't mean that there's not people who also want something else. And and people who want both. Like, look, I mean, I'm guilty of consuming garbage from time to time. I'm on TikTok, like, but I'll still read a good book.
Yes. Oh, TikTok. Yeah. It's I tell you what, it's a crazy world we live in. One thing that was interesting, I was reading in the Author, which is the Society of Authors kind of monthly newsletter. They were talking about all sorts of AI, related things. And one thing that was interesting is in one of the articles about AI, they were talking about AI creatives within their contracts being able to build in clauses that maybe refuse AI generated reviews and things like that. And or require, in addition to an AI review, or a human review as well. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds nice. I don't know how. I guess because I don't know how you enforce any
Yeah.
of this stuff. I
Yeah.
think like that article, the authors, so the Society of Authors article, where
Yeah.
they sort of say like, you know, here's what we can do and here's what we are doing.
Yeah.
Is great.
Yeah.
When it comes right down to it, you know, Netflix and tech companies like that sort of do seem to have so much power that I don't know how you would enforce something like that.
Yeah.
But we should try.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I kind of agree with it. I think it would be really difficult, but I'm like, yeah, I think something like that should happen, because otherwise, I remember during my MA, someone they showed us a short story film, and it was all about hyper reality, and you sort of touched upon this stuff earlier, with one of your earlier comments, and this whole film was, this girl was going to the grocery store, and she's basically wearing, AI glasses, and everything she sees is, you know, colorful and zany and poppy, and she's putting things in her cart, and it's just automatically paying for it, and it's, there's music and bright lights, and it's a really vibrant, crazy world that she's experiencing, and she's just going through the grocery store. And then at one point the glasses get affected, and they get a virus, and they shut down. And then you see that she's just in a stanky grocery store,
right?
Because all of that artificial stuff is gone, and she's returned to reality. And I suppose there is this sort of last worry that I have, is like, well, are we getting to a point where we're going into sort of a Wall-E like situation, where we just want to escape physical reality?
Man, I mean, so actually this was an interesting, I forget which article this was in, but someone was talking about how like climate change is actually starting to affect production of movies. Like you can't film, I forget what movie it was, but they were in Texas and they had to shut down because there's like Cat 4 hurricanes just like all the time. So when you think about like, okay, a world like the one I wrote about in my books, to bring it full circle, in that world, is it, or what's the book? Is it Ready Player One? No.
Probably.
Ready Player One?
He does wear the Oculus-y kind of thing, and
where they live in the video game or
whatever. That's it. Yes. Yeah.
I don't know. Is it better when the actual world is such a garbage fire?
Yeah.
I don't know. It doesn't seem like that's the solution, right? It seems like the solution is to put out the garbage fire.
Yeah.
But that doesn't appear to be happening either. So what are we going to do?
Not so much. But yeah, cool. Well, I think we can.
On that
note, I know, right? Before we wrap up, then, I mean, what's a positive note that we could end this on? I don't know.
I think so. As I thought about this, I think obviously support the writer's strike. Like, I don't know however you can find ways to support it. And by support indie authors. If you can, and if you'd like to. And then this idea that I kind of was thinking about of like live in person or localized entertainment, like finding ways to make stuff with your friends. And like, if that is the future, like, can we get back to a world where it's like immediate storytelling with your immediate circle of friends, like around the campfire, like it used to be like back in, Paleolithic times or whatever. Can we get back to a world where we are just telling stories for each other in our immediate groups, and we don't need streaming companies to do it for us? Like, I don't know. That's that's obviously a very sort of like out there punk rock, like let's all kumbaya together and save the world kind of thing. But maybe that's the sort of incredibly innovative, disruptive, like way we need to be thinking.
Yeah, I agree. I like this idea. I really do think that, much like the various points in history where there is a new disruptive art form, we will have to come up with the counter to this, to this stuff, and that's I'm excited for that, and I definitely think that there's even if you are indie publishing books and things like that, that is a way of producing authentic human stories versus it's inevitable that publishers are soon going to start producing AI written books. It's just going to happen. It will happen. And it will annoy the bejesus out of me, but as long as there's always people out there who are trying to produce and release the authentic stuff,
Yeah.
I think people will really be drawn to that.
Yeah.
So yeah, Liz, this was a lot of fun. I'm glad we got to hash out some AI thoughts today.
Yeah, this was cool. This was a good time. Thank you.
Where can people find you on those AI driven social media platforms?
So you can find me. My website is lizshipton.com. Everything you will need to know is there. My books are available on Amazon. They're also available direct through my website shop. And then you can find me. I'm very active on TikTok. It's at Liz Shipton Author, and on Instagram at Liz Shipton Author. And then I also have an Instagram account for our sailing adventures, which is called at SV_Loki. And you can track kind of our adventures and our progress. And there's lots of pictures of monkeys and fun stuff like that.
Wonderful. Cool. Yeah, so this was a lot of fun. We'll definitely have you back on at some point. I'm sure there'll be more AI stuff or other things that'd be fun to talk about
Totally. Yes.
in the near future. We never really got on. We sort of teased the idea of maybe talking about authors and using TikTok. We
like, if we do that, it's just going to be me bitching for an hour. So
yeah, that would be me too. It'd be like, yeah, yeah. So we're not going to do that. We're not going to do this today. But yeah, thanks everyone who tuned in and for your comments. Chief Brody Rules and Jeffrey, thank you for hanging out with us. And yeah, follow Liz, buy her books, and I will see you next week for a retrospective on the 1995 film Batman Forever. It's going to be great.
Awesome.
I've got two really exciting guests who are going to be joining me for that. As long as the writer's strike doesn't change anything, I've got two exciting guests who are going to join me for that one. So I'm quite thrilled. But yeah, so we will see you all next week. So enjoy your night.